Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Starbase in southern Texas. My name is Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now, and you are watching special joint live coverage of the 7th flight of the now more than 400-foot tall Starship rocket, standing tall at Launch Tower 1. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, the road is closed, the pad is clear, and SpaceX says that weather is currently green for launch and all systems are looking good as they're trending towards this next test flight for the Starship program. Throughout the course, the broadcast will be talking all about this ultimately reusable two-stage launch vehicle, the mission ahead, the milestones in the past, and the plans that SpaceX has for Starship in the rest of 2025 and beyond. Right now, we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 56 minutes, 6 seconds, and counting from the planned lift off of Starship Flight 7. Fueling will get going in about 40 minutes with the SpaceX launch director giving the go for prop load at T-minus 1 hour and 15 minutes, with fueling getting started at the T-minus 45-minute mark, just after the 46-minute point. Whether you're watching on the LabPadre stream or Spaceflight Now, you can do us a big favor and support both these channels by clicking the like button and sharing the stream, whichever stream you're watching. That'll help the YouTube algorithm do its thing and help bring more eyeballs to this joint live coverage, and that is greatly appreciated. Weather's been the scuttlebutt for SpaceX with this launch, having to punt a couple of times throughout the course this week. But now, as many space fans have deemed it, we are here on the day that many have called Starglen. The latter half of that has been ticked off with this morning's launch of Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket from here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And in less than 2 hours, we'll see if SpaceX is poised and ready to hold up its side of the combo day, the launch of Starship Flight 7. As mentioned, this is joint live coverage between Spaceflight Now and LabPadre, so I want to extend a broad thank you to all the folks that are involved with making this live launch coverage possible on both sides of the stream. Taking a look at the dual live streams here. Want to welcome in some new channel members on both sides of the stream. Let's start over with LabPadre. Want to welcome in Queen Bees, Random How-Tos, and more, both joining the LabPadre channel member community. And Eric Beavers, been a member for 47 months, saying great view from the hotel. Dan Montgomery also joining the channel membership at LabPadre Gold level. And Jim Waradi with a very generous $20 super chat saying, your live broadcast has been the best. Everyone else seems to be 1 minute behind your live streams. Very kind, Jim. Moving over to the Spaceflight Now side of the ledger. Want to thank Blargal the Alien with a $10 super chat, saying good luck with your next little launch from a friend in an area of northwest of Las Vegas. A little tongue-in-cheek there. And a thanks to channel member Clistia Lee, a moderator for us, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Appreciate that. Coming now to the launch at hand, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline. These are the nominal sequence of events that we are anticipating with a smooth countdown from SpaceX. As mentioned, at T-minus 1 hour, 15 minutes, the SpaceX launch director will verify that they are in fact go for the start of Propelload. T-minus 45 minutes and 54 seconds, they'll start this time with liquid oxygen on the ship upper stage. If you recall, during Flight 6 last go-around, they started about 4 minutes prior to this, and they began with fuel, liquid methane, on ship. A few minutes after that, that fuel process on ship begins. T-minus 43 minutes. Booster fuel load, largely the same as the last go-around. Couple minor tweaks. T-minus 41 minutes, 24 seconds. Fuel load begins on the booster, tail number B14 on this flight. That's followed by the start of LOX load on the booster at T-minus 35 minutes and 38 seconds. SpaceX will start the Raptor chill down sequence for both the booster and the ship at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Moving right along, the ship prop load is complete at about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. That's followed 30 seconds after that by booster prop load wrapping up. SpaceX launch director will verify that they are go for launch, T-minus 30 seconds. The flame deflector is activated in the final 10 seconds before T0. The Raptor engine ignition sequence kicks off at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all goes according to plan, there is, as SpaceX likes to say, excitement guaranteed at T0. Currently counting down to that T0 at 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2200 UTC for our friends around the world. We've already acknowledged a few super chats here, but just as a quick aside, if you do have a comment or question, whether you're watching the LabPadre or the Spaceflight Now stream, and your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show, I'd love to bring you into the conversation, and you can do so while supporting both of these channels by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. And not only will he be giving us
com check 1 2 3 4 5 4 3 2 1.
Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 46 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. We'll go ahead and say that that was a bit of foreshadowing to our guest that will be joining us here in just a moment or two. Just working out some final audio kinks, hence the 5x5, as a lot of you are putting in the live chat here. We'll bring him in for conversation throughout the course of the remainder of the countdown to talk all about things related to Starship, its development, and its future use. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 45 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. About 30 minutes prior to the point in which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of Propelload. Popping back over to the LabPadre side. Want to thank Yazada for a $10 super chat. One of their wonderful channel members. It says, thanks to Lab and Spaceflight Now. Appreciate the kind words. Also want to thank Spaceflight Now channel member Jeff Hansen for a $5 super chat. Thank you, Jeff. He says, go Starbase, go SpaceX, go Starship, Godspeed, Ship 33, and Booster 14. And thank you to Chuck Close for a $25 super chat as well. Good to see you this afternoon, Chuck. Now T-minus 1 hour, 43 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. While we're still working to smooth out some audio hiccups to bring our guest in, let's go ahead and talk about the Starship program history so far. We'll note that, of course, you see in the graphic on the left-hand side of your screen, that's the Block 1 version of the ship upper stage. Pertinent just one more time, as after today, SpaceX will transition, at least for now, to the Block 2 variant of the ship upper stage. But things got off on a very interesting start with Flight 1 back on April 20th of 2023, lifting off from Pad A. Of course, that was before SpaceX was in a position to try and catch the booster or the ship upper stage. Either of them went quite as far as SpaceX was ultimately hoping, but of course things continue to prove with each and every mission. Flight 2 happened on November 18th of 2023 with a splashdown of the booster in the Gulf of Mexico. Ship not quite making as far as it did in Flight 3 when it made it all the way to splashdown in the Indian Ocean after lifting off on March 14th of last year. Flight 4 came up in the summer of 2024 on June 6th. And of course, Flight 5, that was the big one where for the first time on their first attempt, SpaceX was able to catch the Superheavy booster using the chopsticks on their launch tower known as Mechazilla, following that liftoff on October 13th. Some great views of the ship upper stage as it made its way over to the Indian Ocean. That was our first little glimpse of the buoy cam as well. Time of day changed when it came to Flight 6, lifting off at the same time as we're about to see Flight 7 with a late afternoon liftoff from southern Texas that will allow for a daytime splashdown of the ship upper stage in the Indian Ocean this go around as well. If all goes well, that is. Distinct, of course, with this particular flight of SpaceX's Starship rocket that it is not flying alone, but in fact it's going to be carrying 10 so-called Starship simulators that will have a similar size and mass as the Starlink version 3 satellites. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 38 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. We believe we've quashed all the audio gremlins and we're ready to bring in our guest. Joining us live from Texas, not quite down at Starbase, but not too far away either, is good friend of the channels, Mr. Stephen Clark, space reporter over at Ars Technica. Stephen, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Will. Happy to join you again. How are you?
I'm doing well, albeit like yourself, a little sleep deprived given all of the launch attempts and ultimate launches that happened at very painfully early hours this week. But otherwise, I'm good.
You mean you didn't try to take a red eye from Orlando to Texas this morning?
You know, it was tempting, and I just decided to forego it this time.
Yeah, there are some decisions that are smart. I think that's a smart decision.
You know, whether it's comes. Sorry, Stephen. We'll come back to this conversation in just a second. We're just hearing there's a new T0 for the launch today. 4:37 Central Time, 5:37 Eastern. SpaceX does have a 60-minute launch window available to it, so they do have maneuvering room when it comes to liftoff of Starship. New T0, again, SpaceX now targeting 4:37 p.m. Central, 5:37 p.m. Eastern, 22:37 UTC, which means we're back to T minus 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 22 seconds. Well, given that we have a little bit of extra time now, Stephen, I'll go ahead and get your quick thoughts about our newest entrant into the orbital launch landscape with the early morning but successful in reaching orbit flight of Blue Origin's New Glenn. I want to just start with your top level thoughts on the launch and, perhaps your thoughts on this vehicle's entrance into the orbital launch landscape.
Yes, well, very, very impressive flight this morning by New Glenn, getting to orbit on the very first attempt. 25 years in the making, of course, since Blue Origin was founded by Jeff Bezos back in 2000. So it's been a long time coming. Some might say a little overdue, but to have a giant heavy lift bordering on super heavy lift category rocket like the New Glenn in the inventory of American rockets is a big milestone. No other country has a rocket of this class flying, and now the United States has several. I mean, if you add them up, you think of Starship, New Glenn, even the Space Launch System, and to some degree, Vulcan and Falcon Heavy, all in this category of heavy lift that really no other country has currently flying. The next two contenders on that list of in terms of payload lift would be the Long March 5 from China and the Ariane 6 from Europe, but those are both a little below the Falcon Heavy and Vulcan numbers.
Yeah, and of course, the Ariane 6 just in the process of getting to its only second flight after it too faced a number of delays. So it'll be interesting to see, a few years down the road what the landscape still looks like, if other countries are still playing catch up, if India comes in with another rocket that can match the lift capability of what we have right now, or what that'll look like.
Exactly. Yeah, India is going to be interesting to watch over the next decade. The space program in India is a high priority of Prime Minister Modi in India. They're developing a crew spacecraft. I think that's the Indian crew spacecraft is the next spacecraft that's going to be coming online that's human rated. After Orion flies with NASA astronauts on Artemis 2, and I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. And of course, China, several Chinese enterprises, both state-owned and commercial, are having their own rockets being developed that will, in many ways, match the capability of maybe not Starship, but certainly Falcon Heavy and even potentially New Glenn.
Yeah, and bringing it back to Starship, since I don't want to waver too much from the topic at hand. For those who haven't had the chance to pop over to Ars Technica this morning, you did happen to publish a new piece looking ahead at Flight 7 through the lens of, well, through a couple of important lenses, one of those being the block upgrade that we're seeing here and the block upgrade that is still yet to come, and the impact of that on the Starship program for NASA's Human Landing System development. Wonder if you could expand a little for those that haven't had a chance to read your piece on some of those conversations that you had, and what NASA is kind of looking at for this particular flight and the flights to come in 2025.
Indeed, sure thing, Will. Yeah, I had an opportunity to speak with Lisa Watson Morgan, who is the NASA Human Landing System Program Manager at the Marshall Space Flight Center recently, and got her thoughts on what's in store for Starship this year in particular. Of course, we're about to see the first flight of the year on Flight 7 here this afternoon, and this will be testing the version 2 of Starship, or Block 2 of Starship. I've heard it called both, depending on who you ask. Both, in positions of authority, I've heard it called both. So we'll see what name sticks there. But this version of Starship is a little taller. It has more propellant capacity, and it has improved heat shield. and we're going to see all that tested today on Flight 7. And down the road this year, SpaceX is actually working on an even larger version of the ship called version 3 or Block 3 that's going to be taller, have more propellant, and that's going to be the version that will be used for the in-orbit propellant transfer demonstration, which is required for sending Starship to the moon or Mars or really any other destination beyond low Earth orbit. And that will be a critical moment. So I think the next two big milestones, it's a lot of miniature milestones on this mission and other missions. Every flight's going to have something new, I think, this year. But the two big ones that I'll be looking out for are the catch of the ship, getting the ship into orbit, catching it back at Starbase with the tower, and the propellant transfer demonstration.
Yeah, in our conversation with the HLS program office last year, Dr. Ken Shinaki mentioned that they were really going to start to get into the swing of the prop transfer campaign in the latter part of the spring and let that roll into the summer. Since you've had a more recent conversation with Dr. Lisa Watson-Morgan, I wonder, have they refined that timeline at all? And did they give you any insight into when the real crux of that campaign is set to begin as we take a look at the latest renderings of Starship for that prop transfer?
No. Actually, I asked and pressed her on a schedule, and all she would say was by the end of 2025. So I think those schedules are probably in flux and changing potentially. She did say and confirm to me that I think this was the first time I've heard this confirmed, that version 3 of Starship will be the version that is outfitted and designed for the propellant transfer. So you can think of this version 2 we're seeing flying today as sort of an intermediate step between version 1 and version 3, which is going to be, I think, the version that will be potentially mass produced down the line. Potentially, there's even going to be another version beyond version 3. It wouldn't surprise me. We saw Falcon 9 redesigned and modified up through a Block 5 design, and we may see that with Starship as well.
Well, that's interesting. It's also going to be interesting to see when exactly I'll go to this next graphics so you can get a little bit of a better understanding of it. The image on the left-hand side, of course, is the HLS version of Starship, but with the much larger payload bay doors, and contract with NASA will help deliver the pressurized rover to the surface of the moon that's being developed by the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, in partnership with Toyota. Has your reporting indicated when we might be able to see a version of Starship that can support something like this, or Venturi Astrolab's unpressurized rover that it is working with Starship and SpaceX on?
Nothing specific, Will. I think those are going to be coming after Artemis 3 or whatever mission ends up becoming the first crew landing of Starship. I think some of that's going to be reviewed by the incoming administration, so I wouldn't take the Artemis 3 mission to the bank quite yet of what that will entail. So I think that's probably still in the 2030 timeframe or later, but that's just an educated guess. I didn't ask anything specific about that in the time I have with Lisa Watson-Morgan. One other thing she did mention, though, that I found interesting, and it was kind of a change from what a lot of us were expecting, is she suggested that we're seeing here in this wide shot of Starbase the two launch towers, and she suggested that SpaceX could theoretically launch and execute the in-orbit propellant transfer with just one launch pad if they needed to. So the schedule may not be tied to the readiness of that second launch tower. They could launch one ship and leave it in orbit for a number of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then have another ship on the pad ready to fly again on the same pad.
That would be a very interesting adjustment to the schedule, since it obviously then would depend on either SpaceX having enough of the Superheavy boosters to swap out in a timely fashion, or following the catch of one of the boosters to be able to refurbish it and make their assessments, stack another ship on top, and then keep going with that campaign potentially multiple times with one booster.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how all that shakes out as SpaceX hopefully catches a booster today. They'll be able to refine, exactly how long it's going to take to turn around a booster. Eventually, they don't want to do much of any refurbishment at all between flights, but early on, I think it's going to be a number of weeks or months between flights of the same booster, and we'll see how that affects the launch rate as well. SpaceX wants to fly up to 25 test flights of Starship this year. I think that's going to be an aspirational goal. But certainly, I think there's a really good chance of having SpaceX fly many more times than they did last year, double or more would be my guess for their cadence in 2025 for these test flights. But getting the second launch tower online is required for these lunar missions because they'll have to be launching, depending on who you ask, 10-ish, maybe a few less, or a few more tanker missions to refuel Starship to go to the moon, and that will require 2 launch pads or more in operation.
Yeah, and we've seen out here at the Kennedy Space Center at Pad 39A, they've actually been driving in what appears to be some pilings in support of what could be either the landing zone for the Falcon rocket or potentially the second tower out at Pad 39A. So lots of activity in support of the Starship program in full swing out here as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And there are currently plans that we know of for 4 Starship launch pads, 2 that you're seeing here in Texas, 2 on Florida Space Coast, 1 on NASA property, 1 on Space Force property, and with 4 active launch pads, that's going to enable certainly daily, in terms of just capacity, daily or more, even more rapid flights of Starship in the years ahead. But I think we're seeing that, on the right here, you're seeing launch tower number 2 at Starbase. That looks like, the tower is constructed. There's still some outfitting and dirt work going on around the launch mountain to, install the arms and get those ready to go. So I think there's a good chance, though, of Tower 2 being ready to go this year. But the launch towers down in Florida are probably still a year or 2 away at best.
Yeah, it seems like they've been doing quite a bit of work off and on the first tower that's been out here. It seems to have quieted down, at least for now. Of course, just saw launch number 100 from the currently active part of Launch Complex 39A with a flight of a pair of moonbound lunar landers, one for Texas-based Firefly Aerospace with their Blue Ghost lunar lander, and one for Japan-based iSpace and their Resilience lander, which I know you just did some reporting on as well. Both those missions made contact with their landers and beginning very different trajectories to the moon. So it's really been quite an impactful and exciting week in commercial spaceflight, given where we started with a Starlink launch, missions to the moon, 131 payloads on Transporter 12, New Glenn, and now Starship.
Yeah, it's certainly been an exciting opening month or opening 2 weeks to 2025. And I'll add a few more. There's India Space Agency just executed their first docking in space, which is going to be critical for their human spaceflight program. And I think we're just a couple of days away from seeing China, one of their state-owned aerospace companies, attempting a 75-kilometer hop of a reusable rocket prototype, which is going to be really impressive to see, a methane-fueled rocket that's going to lay the groundwork for their reusable rockets.
Yeah, a lot of really exciting advancements. Thank you for bringing up both China and India, since they're obviously putting a lot of time and investment into building up their both commercial and government-based space programs. So it's a lot to cover, certainly, for those of us in the space press corps, if you will, but never a dull moment. Certainly, you'd be hard-pressed to find a week or even a day where there's, a quote-unquote slow news day. I mean, you really just have to look in the right direction and you've got something to write about, whether it's commercial development or even just now 2 days ago, some of the forward sections of the boosters that'll support the Artemis II Space Launch System rocket were rolled over to the vehicle assembly building.
Yeah, certainly. Well, there's no shortage of activity going on at spaceports and factories in the halls of Washington, D.C., all around the world. There's space news happening every day. And I liken it I've been covering space for the better part of 20 years now. And I liken it to like triage in a hospital. You have so many stories instead of patients obviously coming in, and you have to prioritize them and do that in terms of what's most important, what's most impactful, what's new, what's interesting. So it's a constant process of evaluating what to cover.
Speaking of constant updates, and you mentioned Capitol Hill, so I'll use this as an opportunity for a segue. Also note that we are now less than 2 hours, once again, to the planned liftoff of Starship Flight 7. Obviously, we are just a handful of days away now from a new administration coming in. The confirmation process has already begun on Capitol Hill. A couple of folks have already gone through their Senate confirmation hearings. Someone who obviously is close to our beat that is going to be going through that process, who we've both had the opportunity to speak with, is, of course, Jared Isaacman, the commander of Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn, businessman, owner of Shift 4 Payments, who will step down upon being confirmed. Don't believe we actually had a chance to really talk about his nod for the NASA administrator role, but wanted to get your thoughts on that and the greater context of what we've been talking about now, given the ever increasing drumbeat of commercial space activity here in the United States and beyond.
Yeah, I think Jared Isaacman is obviously a huge proponent and evangelist for commercial spaceflight. He's flown on 2 missions to low Earth orbit himself as a commercial astronaut. And so he's the world's most, well, depending on how you weigh it, he's the world's most experienced commercial astronaut. Of course, we've seen some former NASA astronauts fly commercially as well, but he obviously has his foot toe in the water in that market, in that segment of the space industry. So he knows what capabilities are out there, what's emerging. And I think in the early days of the administration, or certainly after he gets confirmed, and I haven't heard a date for his confirmation hearing yet. I don't think it's going to happen, obviously, before Inauguration Day, but potentially in the weeks ahead. It'll be really interesting to hear the questions directed toward him from the Senate Committee, Senate Commerce Committee, and hear what he has planned or his priorities for NASA. And I think there are changes going to be afoot in NASA, particularly in their human spaceflight program. I think the Artemis program obviously is going to continue to be a priority for NASA, returning humans to the moon, looking at going to Mars. But how they do it, I think, has a high chance of changing under this new administration. And I think commercial companies are going to play a larger role. Now, what that means for the Space Launch System or the Orion spacecraft, I think, is still to be determined. I think there is an appetite to significantly change or even cancel those programs, particularly the Space Launch System, among the incoming administration. But Congress, of course, will have something to say about that. So we'll see how all that shakes out. And I think that's going to be one of the big stories to follow in 2025.
Yeah, of course, we're, long since past, I mean, not too terribly long, but we are certainly beyond the point in which former Senator Richard Shelby from the state of Alabama wielded quite a bit of power and influence to enact the staying power of the Space Launch System rockets. So without sort of big heavy hitters like him in a political sense, it'll be interesting to see what those conversations are like, and to your point, what the confirmation conversation turns to in the line of questioning, specifically from those senators who are not in states that have either NASA installation or are not states like Texas, Florida, or California, where SpaceX has a very specific and pronounced presence.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. There are lots of storylines to follow. My colleague Eric Berger wrote a story shortly before the holidays, discussing some of the things that he's hearing from sources about some of the proposals that may be coming in under the new administration. And the Marshall Space Flight Center is where the Space Launch System program is headquartered, and there are numerous hundreds or thousands of jobs there that are tied to the Space Launch System program. And you mentioned former Senator Richard Shelby. Of course, he was a stalwart supporter of the Space Launch System to protect those jobs and the economic impact that they bring to his state. He is now retired, of course, and there's no leadership from Alabama on the committees that would have input on these policy changes. Of course, there are members of the committees from Alabama, though, who would have something to say, I'm sure. But some of the proposals that Eric Berger reported on last month, would involve relocating some NASA activity, other NASA programs to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama that could offset some job losses that would be uh, uh, a result of the cancellation of the Space Launch System. And of course, President-elect Trump is keen on attempting to relocate the headquarters of U.S. Space Command from Colorado Springs to Huntsville, Alabama. That could offset some of the jobs. So there could be some kind of deal made between the incoming administration and a bipartisan group of lawmakers to potentially offset any job losses or economic impact that would be uh, a result of the cancellation of the Space Launch System to Alabama. There are other places around the country, though, that would have impacts. One that comes to mind would be the New Orleans area, where the core stage for the Space Launch System is built, and of course Utah, where the solid rocket boosters for the Space Launch System are manufactured. So there are other states that would have, impacts from a cancellation that the offsets wouldn't be so clear. So it's going to be an interesting play on Capitol Hill.
Well, and certainly just thinking about the southern United States, you mentioned Louisiana and the Michoud Assembly Facility. Not too far down the road, though, is also the Stennis Space Center, where they do have a number of commercial customers who have access to the test stands, but obviously losing the ability to continue testing the RS-25 engines, and eventually when they get the if it's not canceled before then the exploration upper stage, NASA has a plan to do a full green run test of that, like they did with the first core stage of the SLS rocket. So that would be a big impact to the Louisiana, Mississippi space part of their economy as well, and the jobs that support that. Also note that while not a senator, of course, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has also weighed in the conversation about moving various NASA assets and made an overture for NASA HQ to move down here to the Sunshine State. So it'll be interesting to see who ultimately has the final ear of both the president as well as when it comes to appropriations, how those chips fall with all these folks that are wanting to decentralize NASA in various forms and facets, and what ultimately wins the day.
Yeah, like in so many cases in politics, it's hard to separate the rhetoric from reality or real proposal that someone has. So I'm sure some of the things that have been mentioned, uh, have been floated and perhaps already rejected or will be rejected by Congress. Other things that have been proposed will be enacted, and so don't take all of these ideas and all of these proposals that the incoming administration is floating right now with don't take those to the bank, because the administration's priorities could change, and Congress has not weighed in at this point. So there's still a long way to go.
And miles to go. Certainly the case. Want to take a look at some of the questions that we're getting in here, as we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 49 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. Also want to thank all of those who are currently watching both of the live streams, either with LabPadre or with Spaceflight Now. If you haven't already, you could do us both a big favor just by clicking the like button. It allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage with our special guest, Mr. Stephen Clark from Ars Technica. did have a question that I wanted to go to. This one coming from the LabPadre stream, asking a simple question, but an impactful one potentially to any launch is, how's the wind out there? Spaceflight Now photographer Adam Bernstein, who is over at South Padre Island. Let's see if we can go to his camera view right here, give you a sense of what he's looking at. That's Adam's tracker view right now. You can see it's a little bit hazy down low. Pull back out to the higher roof view. You can see sort of what he's shooting into, that level of haze, a little bit of fog perhaps out there. He reports that it is breezy with some notable gusts that are popping up from time to time. Obviously not exactly the same as it is down there at the pad, but given the elevated position, that'll be, something, of course, that SpaceX will be looking at with the upper level winds with their Starship rocket. Unfortunately, they have not published, to my knowledge, and Stephen, correct me if you've heard to the contrary, any information about the upper level wind limits of this version of Starship.
No, Will, I have not. And I think one thing to keep in mind, though, is a lot of those variables depend on direction of the wind and the shear of the wind at the upper levels of the atmosphere. It's not just the number or the speed of the wind at a certain altitude. It's the change in wind speed or direction at different altitudes as the rocket climbs up through the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's all very good, very relevant points about direction and shear.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no set number. It all depends on the factors on the day of launch.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to now that I'm trying to recall it, spacing on the flight. I want to say it was maybe Crew 9 when SpaceX did a static fire test out at Space Launch Complex 40, and just because of the direction of the wind, it happened to kick back some of the plume and get a little bit of soot on the Crew Dragon that had to be cleaned off before they were ready to go fly it. So, the wind direction is definitely something that can sneak up on you in some curious ways.
Exactly. And another factor that depends on wind direction are the toxic and debris dispersions that would result from an explosion or a catastrophic failure during launch. There are some limitations if the winds are from a certain direction or at a certain speed from that direction of areas that maybe need to be evacuated, or in some cases, the launch would not be a go if the toxic debris from a launch from toxic propellant or even large chunks of the vehicle have a chance of being blown by the wind into a built up or populated area.
Precisely. Speaking of environmental impacts and space flight, of course, you had mentioned earlier in our conversation the desire for SpaceX to get up to 25 liftoffs and landings of both the Superheavy booster and the ship upper stage. Of course, we're not quite at the point where SpaceX is ready to catch the ship, but that is the plan to start that some point later this year, potentially as early as Flight 8. In fact, there was some public scoping and public meetings that just wrapped up, I believe, last week to get some of the community's input on an increased flight rate down here at Starbase. Obviously important for SpaceX and its business, as well as we've been talking about with NASA and the human landing system part for the Artemis program as it currently exists. Stephen, I guess the question to you would be, do you foresee any grand hiccup that would come from public comment that would potentially stymie SpaceX ramping up the flight rate here at Starbase?
Yeah, not that I've heard, Will. I was not able to participate or attend any of those meetings last week in person or virtually. So I don't know if I have anything to report specifically from those meetings that any comments that came about from those engagements with the local community. But I'm not aware of anything specific, and I think, you know, with the incoming administration, they're going to have a different approach to federal regulations. So I would not expect any significant roadblocks to a final approval of 25 flights per year of Starship. And let's keep in mind a year or two from now, that 25 flights, if SpaceX is ramping up their cadence as they hope to, will have to be reevaluated for perhaps 100 missions or even more. So it's going to be a continuous change. Just as SpaceX iterates on Starship, the FAA and regulators are going to have to iterate on their regulations and licensing process through this whole process, because the parameters are going to be changing very, very quickly.
Well, and of course, it's not just SpaceX pushing for a greater cadence with Starship, but the Falcon 9 rocket, of course, they had a bump up to 50 flights at Vandenberg. And in fact, right now they're in the process of going through the environmental impact statement authorization for Pad 6 or Space Launch Complex 6 at Vandenberg that would authorize not only Falcon 9, but Falcon Heavy flights from there. And the Federal Aviation Administration noting, as well as Vandenberg Space Force Base, that obviously when bringing a new pad online, there's the direct implication that that would increase the flight cadence beyond just what SpaceX wants to do at Slick 4. So it's quite a dramatic change for regulators both across the board and across the country right now.
Yep, you're right. And apart from environmental impacts, which have gotten a lot of pushback and criticism from Elon Musk and some others in the space community and in politics, there's also the question of how do you integrate all of these launches, all of these reentries going forward with Starship and other commercial rockets with the national airspace, with air traffic. And the areas of airspace that have to be closed for a launch are shrinking because it's just not practical to close off, a full area of the ocean from air traffic, especially around cities like off the coast of Florida. There's routes going into Orlando or Miami that use that airspace over Cape Canaveral and just offshore every day, every hour of every day, really. And the same is the case to a lesser degree near Vandenberg Space Force Base for the air traffic, and even to a lesser degree, although there's still commercial air traffic flying over Starbase, particularly on routes coming in and out of Mexico to the United States and to Europe. Many flights over Starbase every day, in addition to the local air traffic.
Before we pivot entirely off of this, just for those who may be in the southern central California area that want to lend your voice to the Starship, or excuse me, to the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy flights from Space Launch Complex 6 at Vandenberg, are still two more public meetings. There's one more in person that's actually happening later on today at the Dick DeWeese Community Center in Lompoc, California. That's from 5 to 8 p.m. Pacific. And then there's a virtual public scoping meeting for anyone to participate in, no matter whether you're there in California or elsewhere. That's coming up a week from today on Thursday, January 23rd, barring any additional delays on that. Also, just to make this not an entirely SpaceX-centric discussion of the impacts of launch, of course, you've also got, as we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 39 minutes, 30 seconds and counting to lift of Starship, more folks looking to fly from Wallops Island, Virginia. Obviously, there's the upcoming launch of Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket, which is going to be lifting off from, I believe, Launch Complex 0. Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But you've also got Firefly Aerospace, which currently launches its Alpha rocket from down at Vandenberg currently, but they're also looking to launch from Wallops as well, since things are getting so congested at the Cape. They're looking farther north, so the Virginia area is going to be getting quite a bit of impact and need to consider how to manage that.
Yeah, and of course Virginia is Wallops Island there on the eastern shore. Another, going back to my previous point about airspace, another very heavily trafficked region for flights going up and down the eastern seaboard. So I think that's something that's kind of worth following or worth covering this year. Is I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. A good story would be how all this volume of rocket launches, how it could affect air traffic, and how the FAA is going to mitigate that. Because a lot of there's like I said, there's been a lot of criticism, whether it's founded or unfounded, about the way the FAA has gone about some of their environmental reviews. But I think the impacts on air traffic, commercial air traffic, and general aviation is something else, and it's kind of a serious thing that needs to be examined.
Absolutely. That's actually a good your thinking out loud comment made me want to think to ask our audience whether you're watching on the Spaceflight Now side of things or over on LabPadre. Go ahead and jump in the live chat of whatever stream you're watching in. Let us know, as we're still in the very, very early part of 2025, what are some of the big space stories that you think will make headlines this year, as a part one of my question to our audience. But part two, you've got Stephen Clark with Ars Technica, you've got LabPadre and Spaceflight Now. What are some of the things that you'd like to see us cover this year as far as reporting topics or things to really dive into, whether that's on the realm of more government side and commercial space flight, human space flight, satellite missions, interplanetary goings on? Sound off in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Now T minus 1 hour, 36 minutes, 14 seconds and counting to liftoff of Flight 7 of Starship. T minus 1 hour, 35 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. As we've been talking about, this week has been a blistering pace of commercial and government space activity, and sometimes the combination of the two. On Wednesday at 1:11 a.m. back here in Florida, we saw the liftoff of SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with 2 robotic landers on board. One from Texas-based Firefly Aerospace, their Blue Ghost lunar lander, for their first mission as part of the commercial lunar payload services program. The other from Japan-based iSpace. But I want to stay on the topic of CLPS for a moment. We had the opportunity prior to the launch to talk with a number of folks about the mission, things coming up for the CLPS program. And one of the points of conversation that happened to turn to when talking with NASA's Joel Kearns, who is the Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration within NASA's Science Mission Directorate, was looking at the various CLPS providers. One of those is actually SpaceX with its Starship rocket. Currently hasn't been assigned a CLPS mission just yet. But I asked Joel if that is in the works, or what NASA is thinking about bringing SpaceX into one of those contract assignments, flying some NASA science on board Starship, in addition, of course, to seeing it develop as part of the Human Landing System program. So, want to go to a part of that conversation now. Once again, this is Dr. Joel Kearns, Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration with NASA's Science Mission Directorate.
Well, SpaceX is a CLPS company. SpaceX is one of the 14 companies in CLPS. But, SpaceX is very focused on Starship, for both providing the Starship version for Human Landing System and also for their own corporate goals with Starship. So I'm sure once it's better understood what the real technical capabilities of the costs are in Starship, I really wouldn't be surprised if SpaceX had some ideas on how to bring CLPS-type cargo to the moon once they have that all proved out.
So, Stephen, want to bring you back in to talk about that idea. We've seen a number of, now 3 CLPS providers launch their attempts to reach the moon. One unsuccessful, one largely successful, although had a bit of a bumpy landing, and TBD with Firefly Aerospace. Your thoughts on this massive rocket that we see before us, potentially bringing various types of CLPS-style science to the moon?
I think the let your imagination run wild there, Will, because it could pretty much carry any of these science payloads that NASA has in mind to put on a CLPS lander. And in fact, it could, I'm not sure how it could deliver different landers to different parts of the moon, although point-to-point transportation has been discussed as a potential application for Starship on Earth. But this thing can carry multiple CLPS landers from the other companies inside its payload compartment and drop them off at different places on the moon. Again, thinking out loud here, so I don't know how fanciful that idea is, but that's gives you an idea of the scale of Starship compared to these other landers. It can carry, theoretically 100 metric tons of payload to the moon, and that's a remarkable amount of capacity that a lot of scientists and engineers who want to gather data or test something on the moon could utilize. And like Joel said, they are a CLPS provider. They are eligible to bid on these CLPS task orders or contracts. I'm not sure if they have yet, actually. I don't think they have, if I had to bet, but I don't know that for sure. But we've seen all the CLPS task orders go to a handful of companies so far: Intuitive Machines, Firefly Aerospace, Astrobotic, and I think one to Draper, which is partnering with iSpace, who also launched their second lunar lander earlier this week as well. So those companies kind of are emerging as the leaders of the pack in the CLPS realm.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the others come into play. Of course, one that Joel mentioned in our conversation, not in that clip in particular, was that Blue Origin and its Blue Moon lunar lander in the cargo variant will be, or has actually won a CLPS contract award, so it'll be flying some NASA science to the moon when it makes its uncrewed landing demonstration. And I asked him as well if, thinking about Starship making its own uncrewed landing demonstration, if the Science Mission Directorate is planning on adding some science instruments on board that flight, since it would seem, in my mind, to make sense if you're going to go ahead and send an uncrewed Starship to the moon anyway, why not add in a couple of, CLPS payloads, since the whole goal of the program is to create these higher risk tolerant opportunities to go to the moon, recognizing that, not all of them are going to succeed, that you're going to have varying outcomes, that if you need it to work super well for the human version of Starship, that you can fly some science as well. And he said that those discussions are ongoing right now, but they haven't, to your point, it sounds like, made a firm decision to tack on an instrument or two just yet.
Yeah, I agree. Why not? If the ship's already going to the moon for this uncrewed demo, I think that's a good idea, and I think that's something NASA will consider as that flight gets closer to launch. And just one more thing on CLPS while I'm thinking about it. The CLPS program started back in 2018, and you mentioned the entire premise for the program is to create what I've heard called shots on goal, to use like a hockey or a soccer or football term, and accepting higher risk for these missions, knowing that not every one of them is going to succeed. And I think the former, if I remember his quote correctly, former NASA science chief Thomas Zurbuchen, told me that he thought these early CLIPS missions each would have a 50-50 chance of success, and that's exactly what has happened so far with two missions by Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines. One of them failed to reach the moon. One of them did make a soft landing on the moon, although it did tip over, but it was still the first controlled landing on the moon, soft landing on the moon, by the United States since 1972. So still a remarkable achievement. I think this year, with those two missions now complete, with Firefly on the way to the moon, with Intuitive Machines launching their second mission next month. iSpace this mission is not part of the CLIPS program, but they are part of the CLIPS family. So it'll be interesting to watch how that mission goes with their Resilience lander that launched in tandem with Firefly's Blue Ghost earlier this week. Those missions aren't going to be getting to the moon till, in Firefly's case, March, and I think a couple of months later for iSpace. These three missions all launching to the moon within a few weeks of each other. I think there's, NASA talks about accepting risk and risk of failure, risk of not reaching the moon, but I think there's a lot of maybe implied pressure or anxiety about these three missions. At least I think NASA's going to want to see one or two of them at least have a successful landing and be able to operate on the moon as intended and collect science data in order to prove out the CLIPS concept and gain support for that both politically and from commercial companies going forward.
Well, and to that point is where T-minus 1 hour, 26 minutes, 43 seconds and counting to liftoff of Starship Flight 7, from just a scientific, accomplishment perspective, you're going to want to have the ability to say, hey, I want to study this very specific part of the moon, and so I need, not just to be in the general ballpark, but to, give me like within a 50-meter, bubble for the landing. So, the level of precision for these landers is, going to have to get better in order to meet the expected outcome from science and research institutions that are coming down the road. One other thing just in the realm of iSpace and its partnership with the CLIPS program. iSpace, for the general audience who's unfamiliar with that company, has 3 different bases of operations. Sort of the main one when you think of iSpace that is headquartered in Japan. They're the ones behind the Resilience rover that you just saw launch on Wednesday. iSpace US is the part of the company that is going to be developing the lander in partnership with Draper as a part of the CLIPS program. And then, iSpace Europe develops the rovers that fly on these various missions. So for those who are watching coverage or read a little bit about the mission launching to the moon, or that is on the way to the moon right now, there's a little Tenacity micro rover that is flying with a number of science instruments on board. That's coming from Europe. And so, yeah, lots of global puzzle pieces around here, but just to give folks that little bit of extra context.
Yes, good context, and it's iSpace is a startup. It's only been around for a few years, but they're a global company, and iSpace US is led by Ron Guerin, who is a former NASA astronaut, and Draper, who is one of the CLIPS providers that NASA has in among their companies that they've selected to be eligible for CLIPS missions. Draper, on its own has gone to iSpace, and iSpace is essentially a subcontractor to Draper. So Draper will operate and manage the mission. iSpace will build the lander for that CLIPS mission going forward. So as I said, iSpace, this mission that launched earlier this week that iSpace is sending is a fully commercial mission, but they are part of the CLIPS family, and NASA will be interested in how that mission goes. And I think there are 13 or 14 of these CLIPS companies that NASA has selected to be eligible for these contracts and these task orders, and we've only seen NASA go out and award actual contracts and firm mission orders to 5 at this point if you count Blue Origin, And much like we've seen in other segments of the industry, launch comes to mind. Starts out with many of these startups with an idea or concept or PowerPoint or some hardware testing, but only a few are going to float to the top and emerge as leaders. And I think the same thing is going to happen with Clips. You're going to see 2 or 3 or 4 of these companies be reliable, regular providers, and the others either won't make it or will exit the market.
Yeah, and I was just looking up some of the upcoming Clips missions and the ones that have been awarded. Looks like Intuitive Machines has 4 on the books right now. Firefly has 3. You've got the Draper Airspace combo with the Apex 1 lander, and then the Mark 1 lunar lander from Blue Origin, that is their Blue Moon Mark 1, that's going to be heading to the lunar south pole when it makes that uncrewed landing demonstration. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 22 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. Just for a little point in time reference of where we are less than 10 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director is set to take that poll and verify that they are go for the start of Propelload today. You can see a number of boats going in and out of the canal there. Obviously, a lot of folks looking for as good of vantage points as they possibly can to catch this flight of Starship when it does make its ascent off of Pad 1 there. Talking a little bit more specifically about the mission here, Stephen. I mean, we could hit a number of aspects, but let's just start with the catch. Speaking of batting, 500 or a 50% success rate, they hit the mark on the first time with Flight 5. They had to divert because of some damaged sensors on the tower during the launch of Flight 6. In their description of the mission that is about to happen in less than an hour and a half, they did talk about adding in some additional hardware to protect those sensors and make them a little bit more resilient. Not that you have a crystal ball right in front of you or a magic 8-ball, but given what we know about where they are with those developments, how confident or not are you feeling in a successful catch of the Superheavy booster this go-around?
Pretty high. I think a pretty high chance of a catch on this attempt. We saw the first catch in October. We learned later that there was a technical issue or concern with I think one of the engines or on the Superheavy booster that almost caused a divert for that, but it ended up working. That was a remarkable thing to witness. You and I were both there to see it in person. Something I don't think either one of us will ever forget seeing and witnessing. And in November on Flight 6, the booster was completely healthy, and you mentioned the sensors on the tower were damaged during the launch, which is why the booster had to divert out to sea. So that gives me a healthy degree of confidence that the booster will be able to make an attempt for the catch on this mission. And obviously SpaceX is confident if they don't have to divert of a successful catch, because we talked a lot about this in October before the first catch attempt, that if something happened, something went wrong during the catch, it could damage the tower, damage the launch pad. That would require months potentially of rework and repairs, and create a gap in launches and downtime that SpaceX nor NASA really want right now, with so much relying on Starship for the human return to the moon. So that's something that's still in the back of my mind. To be honest, it hasn't been talked about a lot since SpaceX accomplished it successfully back in October. But something does go wrong, it does damage the launch pad. What impacts does that create going forward? But I'm fairly confident that there won't be a need for a divert today. And if they don't divert, I have a high degree of confidence that they will catch it.
Well, to your point, it was certainly an unforgettable experience to see that first historic catch on their first attempt definitely blazoned on my mind, and was quite a moment. I'm glad we were able to share that down in southern Texas, just a few miles away from the pad. And we'll have Stephen come back and join us a little bit later on in the broadcast. Stephen Clark, reporter with Ars Technica. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 18 minutes, and 18 seconds to go, as we are just about 3 minutes away from the point in which the SpaceX flight director set to conduct that readiness poll for the start of Propelload today. Given that SpaceX had to cycle back to the beginning, or to a new T0, make that adjustment, I know there's quite a number of folks who were here now that were not here with us when we started the broadcast. So let's go back just a little bit and talk about the countdown timeline to let folks know where we are about to go under a nominal countdown scenario. Didn't mean to rhyme that much, but here we are. That poll on the start of Propelload, that readiness set to be taken at T-minus 1 hour, 15 minutes, and that's followed up by the start of fueling, with liquid oxygen being flowed on board the ship LOX tanks. Ship upper stage will then receive its fuel, that liquid methane, starting at the T-minus 43 minute mark. T-minus 41 minutes, 24 seconds, booster fuel load begins. Last fueling milestone to start is the LOX on the booster. That will get underway at T-minus 35 minutes and 38 seconds. Not a ton of change in this fueling process, although an important switch that we see from Flight 6 to Flight 7. Last go around, they started with the ship fuel, that liquid methane, around T-minus 49 minutes and some change. And then they went to begin loading liquid oxygen. As you see here, though, they have inverted those as far as the order and also reduced the timing. So now we're actually much closer as far as overall fueling timelines to something that we would see with a Falcon Heavy rocket out here in Florida. The engine chill for the Raptor engines on both the booster and the ship upper stage get underway at the T-minus 19 minute 40 second mark. Fast forward to T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Prop load on the ship upper stage wraps up. That's followed 30 seconds after that by prop load on the booster. At that point, the Starship rocket is fully loaded and ready to go. In the final 30 seconds, the SpaceX flight director will give their go for launch. The flame deflector is activated in the final 10 seconds of the count. The Raptor ignition sequence begins at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 33 Raptor engines ignite and are healthy, or even if some of them don't ignite, well, as SpaceX likes to say, excitement is guaranteed, and we'll hopefully see a good liftoff of this fully integrated Starship stack coming up here at in 1 hour, 14 minutes, 38 seconds. So at this point, SpaceX should have made the call on the start of Propelload today, targeting a T0 liftoff at 4:37 p.m. Central, 5:37 p.m. Eastern, 22:37 UTC. the webcast from SpaceX is not expected to begin until about the final 35 minutes before liftoff, at which point we'll be able to bring in those additional views coming in from SpaceX. Echoing the super chat comment that we have here from Well Reasoned. If you haven't already, you could do a big favor to both of these channels in the live streams, LabPadre and Spaceflight Now, by clicking the like button and sharing the stream. It allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we continue on through the countdown towards Starship Flight 7. Time now T-minus 1 hour, 11 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. We are starting to see some prominent venting coming from the launch tower there. The first part of the fueling process getting underway, but a good indication that the go-ahead was given for the start of prop load, which will begin at the T-minus 45 minute 54 second mark with ship liquid oxygen load. This vent somewhat reminiscent of what we see down here at Cape Canaveral or at the Kennedy Space Center with the so-called big vent, as the feed lines are being conditioned prior to second stage liquid oxygen load on a Falcon 9 rocket. Similar process be happening here, conditioning the lines prior to loading that locks on the ship upper stage. A few minutes after that, liquid methane will also start flowing on board the ship upper stage, S-33. Time now T minus 1 hour, 6 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. One of our Spaceflight Now photographers, Adam Bernstein's been down at Starbase helping to support our coverage of this upcoming liftoff of Starship for Flight 7. I want to take a look at one of the photos that he captured when cruising around Starbase. Taking a look at the forward flaps on the ship upper stage and a couple of SpaceX workers you see there on the bucket lift. That's just off of the side of the right-hand flap. A couple of nice details you can see in this image. An homage to the Dragon program you see just next to the hinge, not at the bottom, but right in the middle of each of the flaps, a little decal for a Dragon spacecraft. Potentially one as a nod to the Cargo Dragon program, another to the Crew Dragon program, and an acknowledgement that future versions of Starship will be able to take on capabilities from potentially both. As we've been talking about with Stephen, the version 3, or Block 3 version of Starship will likely be the one, or if not that, Block 4, that will be able to carry large payloads and humans on board in various iterations. SpaceX also made a point to redesign these forward flaps, a little bit of a different design than what we saw during the previous flights of Starship, part of its block upgrade. These flaps reduced in size and move forward on the vehicle, have slightly different tilt as well, which SpaceX says, quote, significantly reduces their exposure to reentry heating while simplifying the underlying mechanics and protective tiling, end quote. And while this Block 2 Starship is not going to be sending payload to orbit, it does have some payloads inside. Taking a look at another photo from our Adam Bernstein, looking at the payload bay door, what SpaceX likes to refer to as the PEZ dispenser. Little Mechazilla decal off to the right of that. But SpaceX has 10 of the so-called Starlink simulators on board, which are similar in size and weight as the version 3 edition of the Starlink satellites will be. They will follow the same flight path as the ship upper stage once it separates and begins its flight path. These simulators will splash down in the waters of the Indian Ocean as well, similar to ship. So they will not go into orbit. Again, this is one of the things that SpaceX is looking to demonstrate on this flight. That payload deploy demonstration scheduled to take place at T plus 17 minutes and 33 seconds into flight. That'll be followed by a Raptor in-space relight demonstration as well. That's coming up about 20 minutes after the payload deploy demo. Time now T minus 1 hour, 2 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. Do have an update from SpaceX that the team is go for prop load. Once again, propellant load on the Starship fully integrated stack will start at T minus 45 minutes, 54 seconds with liquid oxygen flowing on board the ship upper stage. Time now T minus 59 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Want to address a question via Super Chat to the LabPadre stream from Andy Alder, asking what day slash time slash day locally will ship be splashing down. As far as the day, it'll be January 17th, so Friday, when it splashes down. Roughly, it'll be about 9:40 something. Yeah, about 9:43 a.m. locally is, if I'm doing my time conversion correctly, that's about when ship will be splashing down in the waters of the Indian Ocean. Question from the Rocket Girl asking what are the chances there's a scrub on tonight's launch attempt? Well, weather is looking pretty good. Teams have pulled go for prop load, which is about to begin here in roughly 20 minutes. SpaceX does have a 60-minute window in this launch today. There's a technical issue that comes up. They would have, depending on when they scrub, if they were to scrub, then that would determine when they would target a backup opportunity. But again, so far, all indications suggest that they are in a good position to move forward with the launch of Flight 7 today. You see the vent at the middle of the tower has wrapped up, a good indication that we are closing in on the start of LOX load here on the ship upper stage. T minus 54 minutes, 45 minutes, 54 seconds. So just about 11 minutes from now. Seeing another good vent here from the launch tower here. So we're T-minus 52 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. Just about 7 minutes away from the start of ship LOX load beginning. Question from Robert Wells asking if there are any damages detected so far with this ship and or booster. Don't believe so. Think everything is going along fine. SpaceX noted before they really got into the rhythm of this pre-fueling process that they weren't tracking any issues, I believe, on Starship. Question from Mauser58907 asking if we can see ship 34 from there and if it's getting frosty. They say I'd love for SpaceX to show it being tested during the flight. It's actually not being tested right now, and we just had Lab take a look at the Rocket Ranch camera, which is the one that you can go over to check out on the LabPadre YouTube channel when testing is underway. But don't worry, you're not missing anything right now. Ship 33 is the star of the show today, along with Booster 14. So we will keep all of our attention focused on here, but you can head on over to LabPadre's channel and check out the Rocket Ranch view for updates on that. And of course, Lab will post future updates on the progress of that testing. Time now, T-minus 47 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. We're just a couple minutes away, less than 2 minutes now till the start of ship LOX load. Now T minus 45 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. And now SpaceX is beginning prop load on its ship upper stage, beginning with liquid oxygen. Time now, T minus 43 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. We are just about 10 seconds away from the start of liquid methane flowing on board the ship upper stage as well. Starting now. Seeing some additional venting there from the tank farm as SpaceX is preparing to start fueling the booster stage here in the next several minutes. Start with first the liquid methane on board the booster, starting at T minus 41 minutes and 24 seconds. That'll be followed by LOX load on the booster at T minus 35 minutes and 28 seconds. Time now, T minus 41 minutes, 24 seconds and counting, and now booster fuel load is underway. Time now T-minus 39 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Just a few minutes away from the start of booster LOX load. If you want to go back to that shot real quick, you can see the frost lines starting to form on the ship upper stage as liquid methane, liquid oxygen have been flowing on board the upper stage now for a few minutes. Also starting to see that liquid methane fuel line on the frost line from that on the booster as well. You look about halfway up the booster. Time now T-minus 35 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. And at this point, the final fueling milestone is now underway. Liquid oxygen is flowing on board the booster stage of this fully integrated Starship rocket. Start to see that frost line form near the base of the Superheavy booster. With that, want to bring back in our friend, Mr. Stephen Clark, space reporter over at Ars Technica. Works alongside Eric Berger over at the outlet. Stephen, welcome back. You're just in time to see the Starship really get frosty here.
Yes, happy to be back. And the ship is coming alive. Booster is too.
And we should be getting some views now from SpaceX momentarily. It looks like their webcast is starting, so we'll be working those into our live stream as well. Did want to wait till you were back, Stephen, to bring in one of the questions that we got, since it was specifically directed to you. Put it up on the screen so you can read it, and I'll say it out loud for those who may be visually impaired. For Clark, with the success of New Glenn, what aspirations do you see for Blue Moon this year now?
Yeah, that's a good question. The New Glenn rocket, of course, is going to be the launch vehicle for Blue Origin's Blue Moon lunar lander. And Blue Origin is developing 2 versions of that vehicle, the lander, Blue Moon Mark 1 and 2. Mark 1 is going to be a cargo version of the Blue Moon. Mark 2 will be the crew version, and it will perform much the same function as Starship for NASA as the human landing system. So NASA will have 2 human-rated lunar landers, one from SpaceX, one from Blue Origin. And as for what's next for Blue Moon, Blue Origin plans to launch one of the early prototypes for Blue Moon on a test flight to attempt a landing on the moon, potentially before the end of the year. And that will be launching, of course, on the New Glenn rocket, probably several flights from now. And we mentioned earlier in the broadcast that NASA will have at least one science payload on the Blue Moon Mark 1 lander when it launches. And that will be the first of many test flights of Blue Moon leading up to its human rating for astronauts.
Great explanation of those 2 lander variants. Just listening into the start of the broadcast here, things are continuing to move smoothly for SpaceX with its Starship rocket. Taking a nice look at a drone view that's circling the pad right now. The next milestone that we're looking for as far as the fueling is coming up at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. That is the chill of the Raptor engines, both on the ship and the booster stage. So we're at T-minus 31 minutes, 8 seconds, and counting. Want to bring in a question from Gypsy King that may seem somewhat simple on the face of it, but it's good for folks that are not as intimately familiar with the Starship program, Stephen. Not seeing it pop up on the screen, but the question reads, what is the reason for this launch? Is it the hopes of learning something or testing something? And I'll start and let you pick up the football from where I leave off, but broadly speaking, the Starship program is an iterative development program where SpaceX flies, learns, changes, and tests by flying again. And so each time that they launch one of these Starship flights, they are looking to improve various facets, whether that's the something like the flap design on the forward part of the ship upper stage, the fueling process for either the booster or the ship, the tiles that protect the system as it comes back through the atmosphere, a whole host of things as they're learning towards a both fully reusable version of Starship as well as one that can support payloads and eventually humans to low Earth orbit and beyond. Stephen, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think, Will, you explained it very well. And one thing I'll add, though, is I've heard SpaceX officials describes these Starship test flights with saying that the payload for these test flights is the data. It's not carrying customer satellites or not going off on a mission to the moon with these test flights. These are data gathering and learning exercises. And so the payload is the data, quite literally. That's what the engineers want to get back. And they will learn something, inevitably, from this flight. Obviously, they want the flight to go well. There are some outcomes that are better than others for all these test flights, but whatever happens, they'll learn something. If it goes very poorly, which I don't expect, they'll learn something that went wrong, a design change that they need to make potentially that will improve the reliability of the next one. And if things go right, then they know what works, and they know that they have a design that is meeting requirements, and they can look at other areas of the vehicle to make improvements.
And it's also not that they're waiting to see exactly what goes right and what goes wrong with each individual one before they start the next flight hardware. As someone asked earlier about the status of Ship 34, they're already in the process of going through tests for the next ship upper stage that will fly in support of Flight 8. The booster for that mission also in work, and so they have quite a bit of hardware that is in flow down there at Starbase that they're working to learn from, and so that learning is extending out pretty far beyond just what is actually actively flying. Take this moment. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Stephen. I was just going to say briefly, want to take this moment to explain we're watching the trajectory animation for the nominal flight plan for Ship 7, or Flight 7, but go ahead.
Just agreeing with you, Will. I think you are exactly right. They have many ships, many boosters in undergoing at different stages of assembly and test right now at Starbase. One thing I wanted to mention briefly was back last summer, they had the ship, after the June test flight, which I believe was Flight 4, they had the ship for Flight 5 already built and nearly ready to fly. And based on what they learned from Flight 4 with the heat shield damage they observed during reentry of the ship, SpaceX engineers decided to beef up and replace the entire heat shield on the subsequent vehicle, and that resulted in a delay of a couple of months to the launch date.
Getting a nice little bit of graphical overlay here as SpaceX commentators talking about the upgrades to the ship that's flying here. Also want to note, and maybe they'll point this out explicitly when they get down to the base of the Superheavy booster, but in the realm of reuse and getting towards a fully reusable version of Starship, they are in fact reflying one of the Raptor engines that successfully returned to the tower here back during Flight 5. Believe that's number 314, or pie, which actually has a little decal of a slice of pie around it. So look for that to make an appearance at some point during the broadcast. Also, they're highlighting that these are a series of different types of tiles that'll be used as part of an experiment to test a variety of thermal protection systems to bring the ship back as safely as possible. This is some great video here, Stephen. This is our first really good look. I know, obviously, LabPadre was able to catch this from the ground when they were loading the Starlink demonstrators on board, but this is a nice view at the height as they were being loaded on board. What's kind of your expectation of this first deployment from Starship? This is something that is wholly new that we haven't seen. We saw a test of the payload bay door on, I believe, Flight 3, but this will be the first time that we actually see Starship deploy anything from there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. I'm not sure quite what to expect. We've seen animations of the payload deployment that we're seeing now here on SpaceX's stream of the PEZ dispenser, as they've nicknamed it, popping out those satellites one after the other. I'm curious to see how quickly are they really going to fly out of the payload bay that quickly when they deploy, or are they going to be spaced out at a slower speed? Eager to see all of that, and it's one of the things that is entirely new about this flight, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if they have any cameras that are on these simulators. Love to see some views as one of them is egressing the ship. Oh, there you see proof that it is Pi that is reflying from Flight 5 on board this mission here today. SpaceX obviously loves to lay into puns and jokes where it makes sense, and the Pi decal is probably one of my favorites that they've come up with so far. You know, Stephen, given this the first time that a Raptor is being reflown as a part of the fully integrated stack, what are you expecting SpaceX to learn? Well, obviously things to learn from that, but what is your expectation, maybe better question, of the performance of that engine on this flight?
Well, I think SpaceX anticipates that it's going to perform just as it did on its previous flight back in October. This flew on Flight 5, so it flew 2 flights ago when they caught the booster back at Starbase, and just interest, and they're probably just interested to see if it matches their expectations, and not sure I really expect any difference in performance going into a reflight of this engine. It's designed to be reusable. They're probably just testing that.
Indeed. Taking a look at the time, we're currently T-minus 21 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. Just a couple minutes away now from speaking of the Raptor engine chill, beginning at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Quick update from SpaceX. They're about halfway through fueling the booster, about 3/4 on the ship, so things are still moving smoothly. Now T-minus 19 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. The Raptor engine chill is underway. Quick question from the Gypsy King asking if this is going to be an orbital flight and re-entry or just flying around and then re-entry. At this point, SpaceX is just doing suborbital flights with its Starship rocket. Good question. Time now, T-minus 17 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. This view from LabPadre, who is at the rocket ranch right now. This is a great area to access and place to view Starship flights that is just about as close as you can get. And as long as SpaceX is launching these flights at 4 p.m. in the day, we got the sun in just the right spot to get some great views, whether you're just watching with your own eyeballs or with telephoto lens, binoculars, or the like. Want to give a big tip of the hat to all the folks who manage the Rocket Ranch for allowing us to be present, live stream, bring you these great views from the Rocket Ranch. Just a few miles down the road, due west of the pad here. Now T-minus 16 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. Fueling will continue on as it is right now until about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds when ship prop load wraps up. That'll be followed 30 seconds thereafter by the booster prop load concluding. Taking a look up on one of the onboard cameras right now, looking up at the grid fins and the aft flaps on the ship upper stage. You can also see one of the chopstick arms that'll be used to grab the Superheavy booster when it makes its way back towards the launch and landing tower. Time now, T-minus 9 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. As we're less than 10 minutes away, getting close to the point of liftoff, let's go ahead and talk about what we'll be seeing in a nominal flight of Starship Flight 7. Liftoff of the full stack is set to begin at T+2 seconds. About a minute after that, the rocket will pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. We'll then hit MECO, which here for a Starship flight is most engines cut off on the Superheavy booster. Stage separation will happen with that hot staging at T+2 minutes and 40 seconds. That'll be followed by the Superheavy booster boost back burn startup. T+2 minutes and 46 seconds, with that shutting down less than a minute later. The hot stage ring will be jettisoned at T+3 minutes and 32 seconds. The booster will be transonic at T+6 minutes and 26 seconds. And just backing up for a second, after separation and before they get too far with the booster, SpaceX flight director and the flight team will make a call on whether the tower and the booster are in a good position to attempt a catch. T+6 minutes 35 seconds, the booster landing burn will start up, assuming a call for the catch is made. The booster landing burn will conclude at T+6 minutes 55 seconds, with hopefully a catch at the tower just before that 7-minute mark. T+8 minutes 53 seconds is when the Starship engines cut off on the upper stage. T+17 minutes 33 seconds is when those Starlink demonstrators will be deployed. About 20 minutes after that is when the in-space relight demo begins. Just a brief burn of one of those Raptor engines on the ship upper stage. Starship will make its entry back towards the Indian Ocean. T+47 minutes and 25 seconds. It'll be transonic, or traveling below the speed of sound, at T+1 hour, 3 minutes and 12 seconds. It'll be subsonic, about a minute and some change after that. It'll perform a landing flip at T+1 hour, 6 minutes and 12 seconds with an exciting landing. T+1 hour, 6 minutes and 38 seconds. And actually, you're seeing some video from SpaceX from Flight 5 and the catch. This is hopefully what we'll be seeing coming up here shortly after liftoff. Stephen, as we're in the final minutes into flight, just want to get your brief thoughts about what we're about to see and your final impressions pre-launch. And we'll come back to you on the other side of liftoff, of course, but before we get down to the final minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm just excited to see another flight of Starship, and SpaceX is about to break its own record for the world's largest rocket by roughly 6 feet or a couple of meters, since this vehicle is a little bit taller than the last one. So a new record will be set. That is a bit of trivia there, but most importantly, interested to see how the Raptor engines perform, the one that's being reflown, as well as the entire set of engines, and the heat shield during the Starship reentry, I think, will be something to watch.
Absolutely. And hopefully we'll have some views just like you and I saw on Flight 5. Now T-minus 5 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. We are almost done with the fueling on the ship upper stage and the Superheavy booster down below. Ship prop load set to wrap up at T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Let's take a quick update from SpaceX, the status check on the rocket here.
That's super important.
Great
Our security guys, Mike, Kyle, Nick, the whole team out there in the elements, making sure everything's clear, doing a fantastic job. And we are coming up on 4 minutes and looking good for launch.
Yeah, certainly exciting. Now, we do have an opportunity to hold at T-minus 40 seconds if necessary. This is a chance for us to perform additional checks if necessary. If we need to repressurize some tanks, or if there's a wayward vessel in the range last minute, opportunity to clear it out. But everything currently looking good. Now, once we pass T-minus 40 seconds, a number of events will occur in rapid succession. The ground spin and ignition systems come up to flight pressure. The ship will go to internal power. After that, the quick disconnect, or QD, arm lockout is removed in preparation for retraction, which will happen shortly after T0. And yeah, once we pass T-minus 40 seconds, we do have the ability to recycle the count under certain conditions back to that T-minus 40 second mark and hold there to assess what happened and assess opportunity to proceed again to T0.
Yep, we've used that T-minus 40 hold a couple of times. Boat's usually one of the items, but we aren't tracking anything right now that would cause us to hold there. We can hold there for several minutes. Main thing you're watching at is you kind of set a clocks because your temperatures will change and the fuel and the locks, everything pretty quickly. So you've got a couple of minutes that you can hang out and figure things out. There are items that if we pass them, we're scrubbed for the day. One of the main ones is that flame deflector at the bottom of the launch mount. Water begins flowing for that at the T-minus 10 second mark. If we scrub at any point after that, we'll be done for the day. And then teams will need to refill the deflector as well as all of our prop that we use to load on board the vehicle. It's pretty much just under 11 million pounds of prop sitting on that thing right now. And we can actually recycle in about 24 hours now.
Which is incredible given the sheer volume of propellant that is on board the vehicle there on your screen.
Time now, T-minus 1 minute, 53 seconds and counting. The prop load has concluded at this point. We are waiting the SpaceX flight director to give their go for launch. That is the last big box to tick before we are ready to see this Starship fly. That go for launch coming up at T-minus 30 seconds, so 1 minute away. T-minus 1 minute and counting. Seconds. 30 seconds. SpaceX has passed through the prop load gate, as they call it. We should be hearing the call that they are go for launch momentarily.
Director Ty Huntington, take it away.
Go for launch.
And we are now just a few seconds away. Here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, engine ignition, 2, 1, and liftoff of Starship on Flight 7. The ascent of Starship on its 7th test flight. It has cleared the tower. Looks like all 33 Raptor engines on the base of the Superheavy booster are performing as expected, and a good ascent 30 seconds into flight.
All right, we're more than 30 seconds into flight. Telemetry showing 33 out of 33 engines as it's pitching downrange.
Now more than a minute into flight. Vehicle passing through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure. Coming upon a few events in fairly rapid succession here. We'll see booster most engines cut off for MECO. T plus 2 minutes 32 seconds. That'll be followed by a hot staging, and the super heavy booster boost back burn will start at T plus 2 minutes and 46 seconds. Call for max Q. SpaceX launch teams are doing their necessary checks to ensure that the tower is ready to support a catch of the Super Heavy booster. They'll also be tracking data coming down from the booster itself, and they will make a manual call on whether they're going to be pursuing the catch or not. Less than 20 seconds away to MECO. Some great tracking work by the team here. Coming up on MECO now. There you see MECO. Next will be hot staging. And the boost back burn startup. We're awaiting the call that they are confirmed go for catch. Hot stage jettison coming up here in just a few seconds. That hot stage range should be jettisoned right now. Confirmation there, go for booster return. SpaceX is in fact going to go for the catch today. So for those in the area of South Padre Island, Brownsville, Boca Chica, keep your ears open. You'll hear quite an amazing sonic boom as that booster makes its way back towards the catch tower. Some great views of the release the hot stage ring there. Now a little more than 4 minutes into flight. Coming up next, the Super Heavy booster will be transonic, or traveling below the speed of sound. With the completion of course, the boost back burn, the landing burn will begin at about T plus 6 minutes and 35 seconds, less than 2 minutes from now. Now a little more than 5 minutes into flight. Great view of the ship upper stage as it continues on with its first burn. If you take a look back at our tracking camera, you can actually still see that hot staging ring. It's the little white dot just beneath the booster there at the top of the frame. Some great views from the booster's onboard cameras. SpaceX said that they had 30 different camera views that are on board the ship and booster with this go around. So expect to see a lot of interesting views that perhaps we have not seen before as the booster makes its way back down in anticipation of the catch. Great view of the booster that's coming back on the tracker. Landing burn set to begin in about 5 seconds. Landing burn underway. Let's listen for the sonic boom. And it looks like a good catch of the Super Heavy booster for the second time. Confirmation by SpaceX that the booster has been caught. Big congratulations to SpaceX for, on attempt number 3, and for the second time, catching the Super Heavy booster back safely at the tower in the arms of the chopsticks. A great view of the grid fins, the hypersonic grid fins that were controlling the steering. And as the Super Heavy booster has been caught, the ship upper stage still soldiers on. On the ship upper stage, meanwhile, they only appear to have one of the Raptor vacuum engines that is still igniting right now. No telemetry data coming in at this point in time either. At this point in the flight, the engine shutdown should have happened, so there shouldn't be any of the Raptor engines still showing as ignited. Might just be an issue with telemetry just coming down, that ship might still be okay, just not receiving good telemetry data at this particular moment. Commentators confirming that they are also waiting to hear the status of ship. One part of this mission appears to have gone exceedingly well, waiting to get the status of the ship upper stage, S-33. Notable, this was the first Block 2 version of the ship upper stage. again, for those who are just joining us, we have seen a successful catch of the Super Heavy booster. You're taking a live look at it right now from our tracking cameras, and now a close-up from LabPadre's camera. However, we are still awaiting the status of the ship upper stage as the telemetry data froze a little bit into the flight. Let's listen in for a status check.
Have comms with the ship, so trying to figure out exactly when that happened and exactly what happened. So obviously the flight controllers right now going through their data, looking to make sure it's not anything instrumentation on the ship, but actually try and get us a status. So again, we're gonna keep listening in on this. We'll give you an update as soon as we have a little bit more. So for now, stage 1 back in the tower, waiting to find out a little bit more about stage 2.
And there you have an update from SpaceX commentator, as he noted that they have lost communications with the ship upper stage, going back and reviewing the data as they have it right now to determine when that cutoff happened and get some indication of why. Meanwhile, a great view of the engines at the base of the Super Heavy booster that supported this return to landing site operation with a catch, the second for SpaceX out of 3 attempts. Let's listen back in.
We caught a booster, but we are still waiting to find out a little bit more on the ship. So it had successfully separated. We did that hot staging maneuver. We did see all 6 of ship's engines on the way uphill during its ascent. But as we were getting to the end of that ascent burn, we saw engines dropping out on telemetry, and we have since lost contact with the ship. So again, we're still listening in on the loops, trying to figure out how much we can get right now. But again, stick with us. We'll bring you updates as soon as we hear them. Really exciting. We were able to catch the booster today. Obviously, we want to get the ship all the way over to the Indian Ocean. May not be able to do that at this point, but we'll give you some updates as soon as we hear a little bit more about the ship.
For those that didn't catch earlier, this was a new version of the ship. This was its debut flight. So a lot of learnings here for sure as we continue to tune in and listen in with the teams and try to gather more information to understand where we stand with the ship. But as Dan mentioned before, teams are trying to make sure that it's not an instrumentation error. We want to find out if it's, did we just lose communication or did something else happen with the ship? So teams are actively working, trying to figure out what we can find out, and we're continuing to listen in and find out more information to share as we can. But as we said before, and you can see it there on your screen, what a beautiful, beautiful sight to see another booster back at the launch tower. That was successfully caught just minutes ago after sending the ship off into space, and having seen it for the first time with my own eyeballs in person, it was pretty awesome. And yeah, the thunder-like sonic boom was really fun to experience.
Yeah. So we are getting a little bit more. So we did lose all communications with the ship. So I mean that is essentially telling us that we had an anomaly with that upper stage. So we're just coming up to the end of that ascent burn for the ship when we stopped when we started to lose a couple of the engines. We saw those dropping out, and then we did lose telemetry from the ship. So that means we didn't have contact with it. So at this point, we are assuming that the ship has been lost. So this was a brand new vehicle, essentially. This was kind of an upgrade version. So with that, there's a lot of things you're upgrading, but there's a lot of things you're going to learn as all of those systems are now interacting with each other for the first time. But at this point, we did lose the upper stage of the ship. So again, we're gonna listen in and try and figure out a little bit more about what happened. And obviously, we'll do kind of a full breakdown once we get smarter ourselves in the coming hours and days as well.
For sure. Now.
Now 17 minutes post liftoff, as you've been hearing from the SpaceX commentators, the ship per SpaceX has been lost after they had lost communication. Just reviewing the timeline here, the telemetry data froze at about T plus 8 minutes and 27 seconds with just one of the single outer stage engines showing that it was still lit. Just going back and looking at some of these milestones here, the telemetry data from what was provided by SpaceX on screen showed the loss of a center engine about T plus 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Then you saw another center engine go out at T plus 8 minutes and 3 seconds, an outer engine at 8:04, another outer engine at 8:18, and the last center engine at 8:23 post liftoff. Want to bring in Stephen Clark, space reporter at Ars Technica, back again with us, who's been watching this all unfold with us live. Stephen, it's sort of tale of 2 points of success and 1 point of disappointment. Let's start with where things went right with the catch of the Superheavy booster. You know, this also featured the reuse of a refurbished Raptor engine. You've still got it supported out there at the tower. Your thoughts on just that part of the mission?
Yeah, Will, it was remarkable to see the booster come back and be caught again by the Mechazilla arms at the launch tower. That's 2 for 2 now. When they've tried to actually bring the booster back to Starbase, they've caught it both times. So that's a good feather in SpaceX's cap going forward. They seem to have got that down, so to speak. Probably more still to be tested and demonstrated to gain confidence going forward with the catch. One thing with the booster, a couple things with the booster I guess I noted were during the boost back burn, one of the Raptor engines appeared to not be firing, but the engine or telemetry display on SpaceX's webcast during the landing burn showed it firing. So not sure if that was a glitch or hiccup on the telemetry or the webcast, or if one of the engines had failed during the boost back and somehow worked during the landing burn. Interested to see how SpaceX describes that. And then the other thing I noted that I don't remember seeing back in October on the last catch was the booster seemed to be swinging a little bit on the catch arms. I don't remember seeing that back in October, and just interested if if there was something missed, or perhaps it's the wind or something like that, and perhaps it's entirely expected, but I just don't remember seeing it back in October.
Yeah, those are both really good visual catches there. We definitely noticed that it had a little more swing to it this go around. I'm sure that is, as is the case with everything that's happened with this flight, something that SpaceX will certainly be looking at in great detail, especially with the engine as you saw it. Let's turn now to the not so great part of the flight, the apparent loss of the upper stage, as SpaceX is reporting that telemetry data was lost, and by all accounts the upper stage was lost at some point as well. Obviously, we can't know with any definitive certainty what caused it to go awry, but I guess remarking on one thing that Kate Tice mentioned in the broadcast remarks is that this is the first Block 2 upgrade of the ship upper stage, and in its first outing, it suffered a similar fate as Block 1. It didn't make it very far, and certainly not all the way to the Indian Ocean, far from it.
Yeah, it was still over the Gulf of Mexico at the time that the telemetry was lost with the ship. So you noted the times. I noted the same times of those various events. T plus 7 minutes and 40 seconds or so when the first engine appeared to shut down, according to the telemetry display on SpaceX's video, followed by more engines shutting down, and then total loss of signal about just short of the 8.5 minute point of the flight. And that was roughly 20 to 25 seconds before the planned engine cutoff, when the ship would have reached its planned trajectory. So whatever happened to the ship, we're at T plus 21 minutes now. I'm guessing it's actually still in flight, the ship or the debris from any sort of mishap, and will be coming down. Have to refer to someone like Jonathan McDowell or somebody to plot out exactly where the debris may fall, but I would guess perhaps the Atlantic Ocean, eastern South Atlantic, or even Africa. But I'll leave that to someone smarter to determine where the debris may fall from the ship.
I will slightly refute you on the smarter point, maybe just with more refined expertise in this one specific area.
That's fair. I'm actually checking his X feed right now to see if he has any thoughts on it.
While you're doing that, I was just going back to see if I can find information about the launch license that was approved for Flight 7. I have to imagine, given that this was not in character with what SpaceX was hoping or planning for with this Flight 7 mission, that this could potentially trigger a mishap investigation from the FAA, a SpaceX-led FAA overseen mishap investigation. But those details will come out in the hours to come. Of course, we're currently just at the top of the hour, 6 p.m. here on Thursday, so may or may not get word from the FAA at this late hour, although I believe they may be reachable at this point. Anyway, we'll do some of that reporting in the hours and days to come. Given that the SpaceX webcast, though, is still live at this point in time, we could infer from that there may be an additional update from the SpaceX commentators on either the status of what happened with the ship upper stage. Actually, let's listen in.
Going to stick around as we were checking in on the status of the ship. At this point in time, we can confirm that we did lose the ship. However, Starship, the total vehicle, did have an on-time liftoff at 4:37 p.m. Central Time from the launch pad just behind us at Starbase, Texas. Gorgeous ascent and successful stage separation. The booster pushed the ship off, and the ship disconnected during that stage separation. The booster came back for a successful, the second ever booster catch at the launch tower, which was pretty incredible to see.
Yeah, it was great to see the booster come down, but we are obviously bummed out about ship. It looked like we lost contact with it a little under 8.5 minutes into flight. That's roughly when you start to get to that main engine cutoff. We obviously need to go through all the data. It's going to take some time. In the next hours, days, we're going to figure out exactly what happened, come back, fly the next one, get even farther. Reminder, it's a test. It's a flight test. It's an experimental vehicle. So we'll figure out what ended our day today and make sure it doesn't end our day tomorrow. So as we do that, we're going to continue to provide you updates on our X account on SpaceX.com. So just continue to tune in there. As we learn what happened, we'll be ready to share it.
So as you just heard, there won't be any additional sweeping updates from SpaceX today. Steve, I'll bring you back in here before we go ahead and close out our webcast. I was just reviewing the FAA's statement when it issued the launch license extension for Flight 7, noting, and I'll read this last line verbatim here, quote, mishap investigation will not be required for an uncontrolled entry provided there was no serious injury or fatality, no damage to unrelated property, and no debris outside designated hazard areas. I think that last part, and I'm curious on your read on this, but, you know, I'm guessing, you know, and someone like a Jonathan McDowell may be able to more definitively identify where the, you know, literal pieces may fall, and metaphorically as well, but I think this may be our indication of whether or not this particular loss of the ship may in fact trigger a mishap investigation. What are your thoughts?
Exact same thought, Will. I was about to say that last
see
part.
Some fire. I'm sorry to cut you off, Stephen. We are seeing a little bit of fire here on the Superheavy booster now. Not sure if that was intentional or not. Just odd timing. We're going to keep an eye on this, and I may have to cut you off if there's obviously something more decisive that happens, but just want to note for our audience, we are seeing that flame at the base of the Superheavy booster just been above the engine section. It's a little bit hard to see at certain points because of the lighting if it's still burning. We're adjusting some of our other cameras to see if we can get a better view. Fire does appear to be out now. We'll keep our eyes on that to see if there's any further developments with that. But Stephen, going back to the FAA's characterization of what would lead to a mishap investigation, or what they describe as what would not be required, or what would not trigger a mishap investigation, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you. That last part is probably what is going to trigger the mishap investigation. You know, debris falling outside of the hazard area, and you know, falling over the Atlantic Ocean potentially. Hopefully, didn't fall over land, and you know, unlikely. Even if it fell over land, unlikely it would damage property or harm someone. But almost certainly fell outside of any hazard area. So I think that will trigger a mishap investigation.
So, as Stephen Clark was just talking, I was talking with Stephen Young off mic about the last time that there was rapid unscheduled disassembly, or a RUD, if you will, of the ship upper stage. As the ship makes its ascent, it crosses in between the Straits of Florida, around Florida and Cuba, and so possibly, depending on exactly where the breakup happened and where those pieces of debris may fall back down, that could be potentially an area of investigation as well. Obviously, since this is not part of the SpaceX predicted flight plan, would not be overly shocked to see a mishap investigation be triggered by this, but we will be reaching out to the FAA and work to get you, our audience, a definitive answer on that. So look for further updates in the coming hours. Well, with all of that behind us now and quite a bit ahead of us, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this joint live coverage. First off, I want to thank our wonderful guest, Stephen Clark, reporter covering the space beat for Ars Technica. Obviously, they can go to the website, Stephen, but for folks that want to follow your work in various spots, where else can people check out what you've got going on?
Yeah, arstechnica.com is where my work is published, and I am fairly active on X, not as much as I used to be, but I do post links to my stories on X and occasional commentary. At Stephen Clark 1 is my X handle.
And we will look for your reporting on this and many, many other stories, as it's a very young year in the realm of space. And obviously, as we talked about earlier, a new incoming NASA administrator, so lots to delve into over the days, months, and year to come. Stephen Clark, Ars Technica, thanks for being with us, my friend. Talk to you soon. As we're bringing this live coverage to a close, want to thank the broad teams who make LabPadre and Spaceflight Now possible. Really appreciate all the hard work that happens behind the scenes that make big live coverage like this possible, and it's a pleasure to be back with LabPadre in a joint live stream again, supporting this coverage of what has been quite an eventful Starship Flight 7, albeit not exactly the way that folks were perhaps hoping would happen going into it. before we go ahead and formally wrap things up, I do actually want to bring Stephen Clark back in. I know we just said adieu, but we are getting some literally and figuratively breaking developments on the breakup of Starship Flight 7, the upper stage. Quite a number of videos are starting to pop up online showing the breakup, and you can see it streaking up across the sky. One user describing it breaking up over the Turks and the Caicos. Stephen, you're starting to see some of these videos as well. Excuse me, voice cracking a little bit, but some incredible views of the breakup of Ship 33.
Yes, yes. There's a video I'm looking at right now from the Icon of the Seas, a cruise ship that was in the Caribbean Sea, based on the originator of the video, showing what looks to be the explosion of the Starship. See a big puff in the sky right at twilight, so that probably aided in the visibility, followed by debris trails coming out of it. But you know, I would say all these videos need to be verified, but there are so many of them. I think that these are real videos, but they're pretty remarkable.
Yeah, obviously we're not showing them right now, because we are not the ones who took the video, and we're waiting for permission for sharing with our audience. But B, obviously we're also, like other journalists, working to verify and be able to attribute them. But as you mentioned, Stephen, just the timing that all of these were coming out and coming together, the angle of them, the similarity across all these videos certainly does lend credence to this being the breakup of the ship upper stage. Really quite something.
Yes, I posted on X a few minutes ago. I think this is the good news is SpaceX has many ships and boosters in development and in test. So I wouldn't say this is a significant setback, really, based on the video is obviously quite dramatic, but when you think about it, I think it was Flight 2 failed at a similar point in flight, and debris fell over the same kind of area north of Puerto Rico. There was some video of that, but it was in the mid-morning hours, so the video was not as spectacular as what we're seeing on social media right now because of the lighting. This happened right at twilight, right around sunset local time there in the Caribbean and in the Turks and Caicos region. So not sure this is actually significantly different than what happened back on Flight 2, which was November 2023, if my memory serves.
Yes.
But the video is remarkable, and I think this is obviously going to require an FAA mishap investigation, and probably I'm guessing it'll be at least a couple of months at least, before we see Starship fly again.
Yeah, and of course, as we were talking about earlier in the broadcast, NASA and SpaceX were really wanting to get into the flow of the prop transfer demonstration, which will require a fairly large number, comparatively, of Starship flights in order to fill up a tanker in low Earth orbit. And there are still a number of steps to get to between here and the start of that campaign, and this is potentially going to slow that down, just getting to that point, just getting to flight number 8, and what SpaceX was potentially angling for with the catch of the ship upper stage. Now there are going to be a lot of questions on whether they're ready for that, what the Flight 8 profile will look like, and what the next steps are for SpaceX.
Yeah, well, all speculation at this point, but I think SpaceX wanted to see the good performance of the heat shield on the ship, and everything worked during the re-entry just as intended before they attempted a catch and return to launch site with the ship. And they didn't get that clearly with this flight, so I think there will be a redo in some sense on Flight 8. and the ship catch will be deferred till later in the year. But yeah, the video, again, for your listeners, the video is spectacular. I just keep going back to that. Kind of scary a little bit, to be honest with you, but I'm caveating that with the fact that this same thing happened on Flight 2 around the same time of the flight, and likely the same sort of debris fell around the same area, actually. And we just didn't have the video of it because of the time of day that it happened. This happened at twilight, and it was the perfect condition. There were the perfect conditions in the area to see this and capture video of it as the debris fell into hopefully the open ocean in the Atlantic Ocean.
So we do have some video to share with you, one of many of clips that we were discussing, Stephen and I, just now. This is the view from the Turks and Caicos that we were talking about, and just given the fact that we don't often get to see firsthand video of a breakup like this with such great clarity, and you can tell just because of the lighting conditions right here, you get a nice reflection from the sun glinting off of the various pieces of the ship upper stage. But Stephen, now that we have video to talk back and refer to, just wanted to see if you can add any additional color to what we're actually seeing here.
Yeah, just we're seeing countless pieces of debris from the Starship re-entering the atmosphere. Looks like, from the Turks and Caicos, don't know. That territory obviously includes numerous islands, multiple islands at least, so I'm not sure which island this was taken from. But flying right overhead, it looks like from the viewpoint of this person operating or recording this with their smartphone. And again, as I mentioned, right at twilight, so spectacular.
Sorry to cut you off. We are seeing another flame near the base of the first stage booster. Just want to call that out as it's just begun. Something else that I don't recall, and as the booster during Flight 5 was coming back, there was a little bit of flame coming back when the booster was returning, but this is now twice since the catch that we've seen this flame pop up. We're wondering if this is a possible methane vent or we're seeing something else here. I know it's getting into a little bit of speculative territory. We don't want to go out too far over our skis with what we know versus what's actually happening. Where SpaceX can just let the LOX vent, there will be some methane left in the tank as well. This might be part of SpaceX's process of removing it from the Superheavy booster, and it just looks more dramatic than it actually is potentially worrying. Well, once again, for the second and now for real last time, we're going to go ahead and thank our friend Stephen Clark with Ars Technica and let him get on his way, as those of us who cover the space beat now have quite a bit of writing to do. So, Stephen, you can follow your work at arstechnica.com. Thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate the conversation insight on what has been quite an eventful Flight 7.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Will, and always a pleasure to join Spaceflight Now for live coverage. And it's been quite a day with New Glenn launching for the first time early this morning, and then seeing Starship Flight 7 this evening. Kind of a tale of two different stories, two different outcomes today, although we're seeing here the booster did make it back to the launch site, and that was the one part of the Blue Origin mission that didn't go according to plan. So different outcomes, but obviously it's going to be a setback for SpaceX to lose the ship at the point that it apparently disintegrated in space and rained debris over the Caribbean or the Atlantic Ocean. And it'll be interesting. It'll be a very fascinating story to follow over the coming hours and days, because I think there will be several things to write about going forward in terms of the investigation, both from a technical aspect and from a regulatory aspect.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting reporting week as we're coming out to the end of it. Lots of questions yet to be answered. Once again, Stephen Clark, Ars Technica, we look forward to following your work and having you back on with Flight 8 whenever that may be.
Of course, looking forward to it, hopefully at Starbase.
Yes, sir. Want to thank our moderators in both live chats who've been doing some great work over the course of this multi-hour stream of big coverage of Starship Flight 7. Big thanks once again to the folks at the Rocket Ranch for supporting tracking views out there and helping us give some great context to this launch and the second booster catch so far. Want to thank our friends over on the LabPadre side of this live stream. Big thanks to Lucid and the full LabPadre team. Especially thanks to Lewis for continued partnership with this live coverage of the Starship program down at Starbase. If you're following the happenings down at Starbase, you want to make sure you subscribe to LabPadre's stream. Keep up with what's going on with the ship upper stage, which appears to be lowering, or excuse me, the booster, which appears to be lowering down to the orbital launch mount as we speak. Want to thank our own photographer, Adam Bernstein, making the trek down to Starbase, providing some great tracking views as well. If you'd like to continue seeing views of the booster as it is lowered and processed, of course, as I mentioned, you can check out many great camera views over at LabPadre's YouTube channel. We'll also have views on Spaceflight Now over on our 24-hour live stream channel, Launchpad Live. Want to thank the channel member communities for both LabPadre and Spaceflight Now for making live coverage like this possible, especially when it comes to big events and big news-making events, as we've had today and really throughout the course of the week. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for providing the technical support for this coverage as well. Most importantly, though, want to thank you for wherever you've been watching this live stream coverage from, whether you're watching through Spaceflight Now or through LabPadre. We sincerely appreciate you being with us for a very eventful day. For all of us here at LabPadre and Spaceflight Now, I want to thank you once again for your time and attention and your interest in the space program. For Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.